Hello there, welcome to the Double Zero channel. We do just one thing on this channel, and that is to take these two dice, and we're going to see how long it takes to roll a double zero with these d10s. The hypothetical odds are 1 in 100, but let's see what happens under real world conditions. If you want to play along, write down your guess now before we begin. All I ask is that you don't disclose the result in the comments. Please just let other people watch the video for themselves. There will no doubt be a few other things we need to explain as we go along, but let's get cracking with the rolls. So, number one, that is a 1 and a 9. I'll announce each one as we go along. And that is an 8 and a 4. And that's an 8 and a 3. We have a 7 and a 5. That's a 2 and a 6. And a 3 and a 0. Remember, it only counts if it's a double zero. Other numbers do not matter. And we have there a 0 and a 9. Similar situation. And that's a 5 and a 9. A 7 and 4. And we have a 7 and a 5. And that is a 6 and a 4. And a 3 and a 9. And that's an 8 and a 0. We have a 6 and a 4. And that's a 1 and a 2. That is a 6 and a 6. Okay. Now, although we don't count other doubles, we do count them in the sense that we keep track of them just to gauge our process. Remember, the hypothetical odds are 1 in 100, so the hypothetical odds of a double, they increase proportionately as we go along. And let's carry on. Double 8. So another one to stick on the pile there. And that's a 1 and a 9. 5 and a 9. And that's an 8 and a 7 there. We have a 2 and a 0. 4 and a 2. And that's a 0 and a 1. So near, but it counts for nothing. And that's a 0 and a 6. Oh dear. Okay. Now, one thing about this channel, there's minimal editing, so if something goes wrong, you're going to see it. And I am going to have to get out of my seat and try and find this dice. There it is. Okay. Now, as we didn't roll the upstairs one, then we're going to null and void that. The thing about this scoop is it makes a lovely clacky sound. It really mixes them well. Unfortunately, it's also the perfect shape to make them jump out of their own accord. So let's try not to make that happen again. Okay, we were about to roll the 25th roll. And that is a double again, a double 1. Sling that on the pile and move on. And we have a 3 and a 6. And that's a 0 and a 4. and that's a 6 and a 5. A 3 and a 7, and a 3 and a 4. A 5 and a 6, and that's a 5 and a 9. We have a 7 and a 9, and that's an 8 and a 2. A 0 and an 8, a 9 and a 3, and that's a 6 and a 4. A 0 and a 5, and we have an 8 and a 4. And that's a 6 and a 2, and that's a 2 and an 8. 7 and 4, and it's a double 7, and that is our fourth double of the session, which is about on par for coming up to 50 rolls. And that is a 5 and an 8, and a 5 and a 5 for our fifth double. And on roll 45. We don't always make it to roll 50, but if we ever make it to a multiple of 50, that 50th roll will be done with real double hander. Hopefully it will not slip out of the top again. But just a few minutes until that time. First, 8 and 0. And that's a 1 and an 8. And we have a 1 and a 2. And that's a 1 and a 0. And we approach the 50th roll with gusto. And it's a 9 and a 0. Fantastic. We carry on for the 100th roll. And that's a 0 and a 9. We have a 1 and an 8. And that's a 0 and a 6. And 7 and 3. A 4 and a 5. A 7 and 0. And that's a 2 and a 0. 7 and 8. A 0 and a 6. And that's a 3 and a 0. We have there a 5 and a 6. And a 4 and a 3. That is a double 2, our sixth double of the session so far. And that's a 1 and an 8. A 4 and a 3. And we have a 2 and a 0. A 3 and a 5. 3 and 7, and that's a 3 and an 8. 8 and 4, a 3 and a 7, 0 and a 5, and that's a double 4, which we will put onto the list, and we carry on. A 2 and a 4, that's a 0 and a 1, and that's a 4 and a 2. We have a 3 and a 6 there, and a 3 and a 2. A 7 and 5, a 2 and 6, a 5 and a 6, that is a 6 and a 3, a 4 and a 1, that's a 5 and an 8. We have a double 4 there, and the 4 is our 8th double of the session. That is is that 6? Yes, 6 and a 1. I know they've got a little line under them, but sometimes I read them upside down and my brain fails to rotate rotate it mentally. Either way, it's not a crucial score though, as we move on. 6 and a 4, and that is a 9 and an 8. 2 and a 9, and that's a 7 and a 9. A 9 and a 3, that's a 3 and a 0. 4 and a 5. Oops. And we have a 4 and a 7. And that is a double 1. And we put that on the pile. 95th roll now. 1 and a 4. And that means if we get to the 100, we're going to do the double hander one again. Just hold on a little bit for that though. A 6 and a 3. And that's a 4 and a 5. A 0 and a 1. And that's a 7 and a 0. And the 100th roll. Just being careful to release them slowly. Oh, okay. We have a bit of an edge roll here. Not unheard of. But it's a 6. It's either an 8 or a 0. Either way, it's not a double, and it's certainly not a double 0. So we are just going to put that down as the 100th roll as it settles onto the 8th. Okay, let's carry on for 150 rolls. Remember, the hypothetical odds are 1 in 100. That's not always the way it works out in real world conditions. And that's a 4 and a 0. A 5 and a 3. and that's a 4 and a 5. And we have there a 6 and a 1, and a double 5, which is our 10th double of the session. Again, what you'd expect after roughly 100 rolls. And we have a 7 and a 4. And that's an 8 and a 6. We have a 4 and an 8. And that's a 4 and an 8 again. And that's a 3 and a 4. We have a 2 and an 8. 0, but a 9. And that's a 7 and a 5. That's a 9 and a 3. 8 and a 3. And that's an 8 and a 6. A 7 and a 5. A 6 and a 4. And that's a 0, but a 6. A 0, but a 7. And that's a 9 and a 2. And that's a 9 and a 4. 1 and 0. And an 8 and a 7. We have a 2 and a 5. And that's a 2 and a 6. A 9 and a 6. Yep, that's right. How did these numbers evolve to be the upside down of each other? Could nobody have thought of more distinct numbers? Anyway, rant over. 5 and a 2. And that's a 0, but a 1. And that's a 5 and a 6. A 9 and an 8. And that's a double 6. So we put that on the pile and move on. 4 and a 1. That's an 8 and a 1. Double 4, our 12th double of the session. 0, but a 2. 5 and a 3. And that's a 2 and a 4. We have a 7 and an 8. A 0, but a 5. A 4 and a 9. And that's a 7 and a 1. A 7 and a 9. And that's a 6 and a 3. and that is a 9 and a 6. We're approaching 150. If we get there, it's a double-handed roll. We have a 2 and a 6, a 5 and an 8. That's a 2 and a 3, a 4 and a 1. And for the 150th roll, a 6 and a 3. Very, very underwhelming for such a massive roll, but we carry on to 200. 4 and a 7, 0 but a 1. And that's a 0 but a 5, 4 and an 8, a 0 but a 2, and that's a 6 and a 7. A 3 and a 6, and that's an 8 and a 6. 2 and a 4, and we have a 7 and a 3. And that's a 7 and a 3 again. And we have a 2 and a 9. And that's a 4 and a 1. 1 and a 3. And that is an 8 and a 6. Oops, there we go. A 3 and a 1. And that's a 7 and a 6. A 0 but a 5. And that's a 3 and a 1. A 3 and a 6. And that's a 2 and a 6. Oops, there we go. Oh, horrible mark there. Right, we'll box that off, and that could be number 1. We have a 2 and a 3. I think this pen may be on its last legs, even though it's got quite a lot of ink in it. Still, we shall persist. And that's a 5 and a 3. That is a 6 and a 1. And an 8 and a 3. A double 4, add that to the pile of doubles. We have a 5 and a 6. A 5 and a 3. A 3 and an 8. And a 2 and an 8. A 4 and a 9. A 3 and a 4. And that's a 4 and a 7. An 8 and a 9. And that's a 5 and a 3. We have a 9 and a 1, and a 9 and a 1 again. A 9 and a 1 for the third time. I tell you what, if it comes out a fourth time, I'm changing my name to D10, Deborah 10. Right, let's see what happens. 0 but a 5, so no deed pool necessary. We carry on, we're approaching 200, just in a few minutes. 5 and 7. And that's an 8 and a 2. That's a 5 and a 2. A 5 and a 4. And that's a 0 but a 1. A 4 and a 9. So that is 195. Double hander very shortly. 2 and an 8. A 6 and a 0. And that's a 6 and a 7. A 4 and an 8. And for roll number 200, we have an 8 and a 7. And so we carry on for roll 250. Remember the hypothetical odds of 2d10s showing 0 are 1 in 100. So we are, yeah, we're kind of against the odds here, but let's carry on. And that is a 7 and a 6. And that's a 7 and a 5. We have a 1 and a 6. And that is a 7 and a 9. And that's a 7 and a 9 again. And that is a double 7, making that our 7 and 7 is 14. That's also our 14th double. But so far, no elusive double 0. We do have a 0, but we also have a 9. So the game continues. That's a 7 and a 5. That's a 0, but a 5. That's a 3 and a 6. And that is a double 6. So we put that on the pile. A double 7. And that's a 2 and a 0. That's a 4 and a 5. That's an 8 and a 6. And that's a 5 and a 4. We have a 4 and a 9 there. And that's a 0 but a 6. We have a 0 but a 9. And that's a 9 and a 4. 0 but a 1. And that's a 4 and a 5. We have a 6 and an 8, and that's a 9 and an 8. And we have a 9 and a 4. 0 and a 9, and that's a 0 and a 4. 2 and a 5. A 7 and 1. And that is a double 1. So put that down and we carry on. A 4 and a 9. 6 and a 7. And we have a 2 and a 6. Now it's a 3 and a 7. And that's a 7 and a 9. 3 and a 9. A 0 but a 7. And that's a 3 and a 1. That's a double 3. So that is our 18th double of the session. And we have a 3 and an 8. And that's a double 8. A 2 and a 4. A 0 but an 8. That's a 0 but a 5. And that is a 6 and a 4. Coming up for roll 250, where we will use the both hands. That's a 0 but a 2. 0 but a 6. A 5 and a 3. That's an 8 and a 4. And for roll 250, 7 and an 8. So we carry on for roll 300. And that's a 1 and a 5. A 7 and a 2. That's a 0 but a 2. That's a 5 and a 6. With 7 and a 3. 5 and a 7. That's a 3 and a 5. We have a 2 and a 5. And that is a 6 and a 6. So that's a double. Becomes our 20th double of the session, which is roughly what you would expect from 250 rolls. But so far, the double 0 has eluded us. Let's see how well we do before we hit roll 300. And that's a 3 and a 1. That's a 7 and a 1. An 8 and a 9. A 0 but a 1. That's a 7 and a 1. That's a 3 and a 1. A 0 and a 5. A 7 and a 9. And that is a 1 and a 6. We have a 0 but a 7. That's a 3 and a 9. A 7 and an 8. And that is a double 1. Doesn't count for anything, but we're going to put it down as our 21st double. A 3 and a 2 there. And that's a 9 and a 3. We have a 2 and a 1. Oops. A 0 but a 7. And that's a 3 and a 6. We have a 7 and a 4. And that's a 3 and a 2. A 7 and an 8. And that's a 7 and a 1. We have a 6 and a 3. A 9 and a 3. And that is a 6 and a 3. A 9 and a 2 there. A 7 and a 2. And that is a 9 and a 3. We have a 6 and a 7. And that's a 3 and an 8. That's a 4 and an 8. A 6 and a 2 there. That's a 4 and a 1. We have a 9 and a 4. An 8 and a 4. That's a 0 but a 3. Coming up for roll 300 when we're going to use two hands. 7 and 6. And that's a 4 and a 3. A 6 and a 1. A 0 but a 6. And for roll 300, that is a 4 and an 8. So we carry on for roll 350. And that's a double 5. Our 22nd double. And we have a 0 but a 2. And that's a 7 and a 3. An 8 and a 3. and that's a 4 and a 1. And we have an 8 and a 3. And that's a 9 and a 6. And we have there a 9 and a 9. That is a double. Put that on the pile. An 8 and a 9. And that is a 6 and a 6. So that's a double 6 there. An 8 and a 2. And that's a 0 but a 5. And we have a 1 and a 3. An 8 and a 2. And that's a 0 but a 4. And that's a 4 and a 2. And we have a 3 and an 8. A 4 and a 3. And we have a double 6 again. That brings us to our 25th double. But the double 0 eludes us still. And that's a 5 and a 6. That's a 5 and a 4. A 7 and a 9. And that's a 4 and an 8. A 0 but a 4. And that's a 0 but a 9. That's a 4 and a 1. A 6 and a 7. And we have a 2 and a 6. That's a 2 and a 3. And a 9 and a 4. That's a 5 and a 4. A 0 but a 5. That's a 3 and a 4. And a 5 and a 6. A 0 but a 1. So very close. That's a 2 and a 4. And we have a 9 and a 6. A 0 but a 6. That's a double 3. A 2 and a 3. And that's an 8 and a 5. We have a 6 and a 9. And that's a 9 and a 3. An 8 and a 3. A 7 and a 3. And we're coming up shortly to roll 350, where it'll be a double hander. And that's a 7 and a 1. A 4 and a 3. That is a double 1, a 0 but a 3. And it's roll 350. And that's a 0 but a 5. So we carry on for roll 400. And the next one is 6 and a 2. And a 4 and a 6. That's a 6 and a 7. And a 5 and a 1. A double 4. Put that on the pile. And that's a 3 and a 1. A 0 but a 3. A 3 and a 5. And that is a 6 and a 9. And we have a 9 and a 6. Again, sometimes quite difficult to mentally rotate them despite the little lines underneath. Just get them centered there. But we carry on. And that's a 4 and a 6. Definite 6 this time. A 0 but a 3. That's a 3 and an 8. And that's a 5 and a 6. And we have a 4 and a 9. We have a double 0. The elusive double 0 comes to us after 350, 360, 365, 366 rolls. One for each day of the year, at least if it is a leap year. And on the way, we encountered 10, 25, 28 doubles. Oh man, I tell you, before I started recording these double tens, I used to do this with double 20s. The odds are 1 in 400 for that one. So we would quite often have games that were this length, were double length. Sometimes they went off the page. But in this case, we have beaten the odds. Is that the correct word? I don't know. But anyway, the odds were 1 in 100, but this one took well over 350 rolls to get, and we saw 28 doubles along the way. So I think, I don't know the mental calculations, but it seems to tally on average. So if you've watched this entire 50 or so minute video, thank you so much for doing so. Remember not to put the answer in the comments. Please just let people watch the video, and you take care.